Good afternoon. I think we'll be starting already. Dear participants, I think all Asia members, colleague, friends, my name is Aleksandra Dziurkowska, WKB Competition Law Team, Warsaw, Poland. I'm happy to welcome you at this Asia Academy session organized by Asia Antitrust Commission on antitrust compliance, ready for a challenge. I would also like to welcome great panelists who agreed to take part in this session and share their comments on compliance management systems with us. Very good afternoon to Quentin Soavi, who is Deputy Director of Group Legal Affairs at Lagardère. Therefore, he has to do with day-to-day management of compliance systems, and he will provide us with his practical remarks. Today, we also have on board Dr. Felix Schraner, lecturer in competition at ZHAW, Switzerland. Felix will tell us about the planned changes to the law and whether they can affect evaluation of the compliance program. And last but definitely not least, the co-organizer of this session, Fabio Babei from Agon Partners, Switzerland, great expert on compliance, and Fabio will explain how to conduct internal investigations. Regarding technical issues, this part will take us about 1 hour. And after, for another 30 minutes, we'll move to breakout rooms to have a common discussion and networking. We've prepared 3 breakout rooms: compliance management systems with Quentin, internal investigations with Fabio, and evaluation of the compliance program with Felix and myself. All participants will be able to choose a room after first 8 minutes of the second part, and then you can freely change rooms during this discussion. And we really hope to have lively exchange of views and experience with you in the breakout rooms. Also regarding technical issues, I will take care of the chat function and questions during the session. We'll try to answer your question immediately, so don't hesitate to ask the questions in the chat box. Don't wait until the end of the session. And please also note that this session is recorded. Okay, so going to the topic right now, the main goal of any compliance system is to avoid violation of applicable law, but also fines that might be imposed to the company, but also for the managers. Like, for example, in Poland, we have 2 first decisions from 2020 of local GCA that impose fines for managers. Compliance programs can be helpful complements to public enforcement activity, ideally by, of course, preventing competition law violations, but also other law violations. In fact, the compliance programs are an important element of competition law regime, is proved by the fact that more and more jurisdictions worldwide include in their law a reward for compliance programs when setting a fine. This is also something we would like to hear from you during breakout rooms. Companies therefore should bear in mind that their compliance systems must meet the criteria for an effective program in order to fall under the so-called compliance defense, which is already used by external lawyers when defending. Creating and adapting compliance program to the needs of a given organization and then managing it properly, especially in many jurisdictions, seem to be a very difficult task. That's what I think. Quentin will tell us about the challenges related to this mission. And Quentin, are you ready for the challenge?
Sure. Thank you, Alexandra. Thank you for this introduction. Just a few words about myself. I come from a compliance background, having trained specifically in competition law, in compliance actually, and business ethics in law school. But I've always worked in the field of competition law. At first with a law firm, and then I started a position in-house. So I've been, kind of on both sides of the table. So I hope I can give you some sort of informed advice as to what clients want and what lawyers can deliver. And the thing is, while I never occupied a compliance position per se, a combination, I guess, of my education and professional training have me approach, legal issues as a competition lawyers with, compliance in my mind. So since the question that asks for attendees and panelists today is whether we're ready for the challenges of antitrust compliance, I will go through some of the challenges that I think implementing a compliance program during the rollout phase and further down the line. So I'll start by offering a very brief definition of compliance, starting with what it's not. Compliance is obviously not the act of complying with the law. If it was so, then any lawyer would be a compliance officer as well. Any memo would be a compliance initiative. It's not, complying with the law is different from implementing systemic measures that are meant to reduce identified risk, which include, training, the added internal investigations, but I will leave that to Fabio. We'll cover the topic later. So leaving this aside, from the outset, you can see that compliance by its very nature is about sustained efforts. It's not about punctual actions, but rather the planification of punctual actions and planned action throughout time. And it might be the source of challenges for organizations and external counsel together. On the one hand, organizations have to dedicate resources to prevent or at least attempt to prevent infringements. And there's obviously difficult cost-benefit analysis to be made that is not facilitate infringements, probably go unsanctioned. Implementing a compliance program is, as far as I know, optional in most countries, contrary to, but I'll talk about it later. And as Alexandra mentioned, not all authorities reward compliance programs. Some do, some don't. There's no common line here. So again, cost-benefit analysis is not easy to make. And on the other hand, for external counsel, you are put in a position where your intervention is by definition, limited in time and scope, since you are not with the organization. But it must deliver benefits that are going to be sustained in the long run through implementation of measures that are based on your initial advice. And said advice must be tailored to the client's, its needs, and those needs will differ from an organization. And obviously, understanding those needs takes time, and lawyers' time is expensive. So it adds to the difficult decision for a company to properly implement a program. So external counsel, I think, have the difficult task to convince the clients that it's very important to implement, again, systemic measures. It's a good investment. And authorities are the most helpful on that front. So I think there's a lot of convincing that has to be done from the outside counsels. And usually competition lawyers will resort for that to scary talks about fines, the 10%. At least I'm speaking from France, and it's same in the EU, the 10% turnover cap, etc. And in truth, fines can be gigantic in competition law cases. And this will probably work with top management because they have this very macro vision of the risk. But to a business person, it might not be very convincing. It's not their money. So explaining that having a risk-averse approach and implementing measures to diminish risks can help secure contracts in the long run. For example, by preventing renegotiations down the line, where one party uses competition law to put an end to a contract, pretending that it's null and void, or that some clauses should be removed and or are not enforceable, etc. This is, I think, more convincing. And I think for external lawyers, it's very important to tailor your discourse to the client you have before you. And sometimes the client is top management, and you need to talk about money. And sometimes the client is a business person, and then you need to talk about business. And compliance actually deals with both aspects. So I think it's important to keep that in mind. Another challenge that I think is faced by a corporation when it and lawyers, etc., when it comes to antitrust compliance specifically, can be probably summed up in one question, and it's how evil is an antitrust infringement. I think if you ask a business person that's not specifically trained in antitrust competition law how evil it is, they probably would say not too evil. It's not too bad, at least in France. Again, I'm speaking from France, and I know that it's a bit different in some other jurisdiction. I know in the US, the people are more keen to appreciate how problematic antitrust infringement can be. But I know that in France, and I think in many jurisdictions within the EU, we do not consider it as evil as, for example, bribery, corruption, evasion. It's very commonly admitted that bribery is bad, it's evil, must be stopped. All governments today enact legislation that forbid bribery, but that also create obligations for organizations to prevent bribery. Today, I think, was published the index of perceived corruption within the EU. This is a big topic, people know about that, and it's easy for people to feel that it's necessary to commit resources to prevent that. And that if you are a business person, it's probably bad that you are receiving gifts to secure a contract. Same goes for tax evasion. Basically you're stealing from society. It's bad. People know that. So in a way, people are naturally more eager to comply. But now, could the same be said, about, for example, let's say a non-compete undertaking in a contract that's, have sort of a broad scope, or a long-term exclusive contract, a loyalty rebate that will help, secure the client and make the client pay less. An information, exchange that would be, between former colleagues, work for competitors before a tender, which, is not about exchanging their offers, but making, market research. How evil is that? When people implement those practices, most often they do it, in good faith to help the company. Those practices can be very helpful for the business. And while a person trained in competition law, a compliance lawyer, and counsel, we have just see that and see red lights everywhere. It's not the same for a business person who might, in good faith, think otherwise. So putting aside, of course, cartels, secret meetings, I'm going to talk about it later, but antitrust infringement, they do not appear very evil. They are basically most of the time, or some of the time, the manifestation of uninformed choices by uninformed people. And that's why, training is very important, and I think training is not easy in competition law because what are the expressions that we use most of the time as competition lawyers? I would say it depends and gray area. Every time we're asked the questions, it always depends. What's your market share? But what's the market? It's a gray area. I'm not sure how old is the information. How often do you share it? And the issue is between legal advice that you're going to give as a lawyer and compliance advice, which is about setting boundaries that are not to be crossed. There's a fine line that is important to grasp, I think. And it's important, obviously, for internal lawyers, it's much easier because, again, sustained relation, you work with your colleagues, they know you know the business. But when, as an external lawyer, you come, you meet the client and you have to make those explanations, it's not easy. So it's important to, I think, prepare those training sessions and have, deep discussions with your clients as to how does the market work? What's the risk for those specific people, and how prudent do they want to be for, again, setting the boundaries where they should be. But back to cartels and evil practices, and as I said, minor infringements they could be, and I honestly think most of the time they are unintentional. But cartels, obviously, most of the time they're not. People, they cover their track, they actively try not to get caught. They know that what they're doing is bad, forbidden, and that it could put them in trouble. And in that context, a poorly conceived program could just offer them the right training. I'm sure, like many of us, I like many of us, I've sometimes, explained that writing this or that is dangerous. Beware of ambiguous drafting, or keep it ambiguous. It's better to not use that word. This is all in an attempt, to sort of do damage control in case the document is read by, someone that is not informed. Make sure that, if an authority read document, they don't perceive an illegitimate practice where there's no infringement there. But, we are basically also explaining how not to get caught. We will sometimes also, we all sometimes give an advice. It could be understood as an infringement, maybe not. And then we leave the business person with that, and we do not do the follow-up. And basically, we just explain that, should you present your practice in under the correct light, it won't look, as infringement, while we all know that might be problematic. So, those effort and advice, those are genuine, but if they don't go in tandem with appropriate follow-up measures, they may produce quite the opposite of what you are going for. And they may teach employees how to cheat. And it's very important for, I think, both in-house and external lawyers to plan the intervention long-term, and include audits or review in the compliance arsenal, because you cannot just give an advice and go away. This is not compliance. This is, again, just drafting a memo. This is your job as a lawyer. But as a compliance officer, if you put that cap on, you have to plan the next move, which is how did it go, and how did you understand what I've said? How did you implement it? And most of the time, we don't do that as lawyers. So this is a different mindset that we have to adopt. And I guess this goes to also my next point. And I'll go back to anti-bribery compliance, because I think it's today it's kind of the gold standard in terms of compliance. This is the most refined area of compliance, and we have tons and tons of authorities' guidelines, and they have long highlighted how important it is to add books and records controls, to add audits, and to have, again, an arsenal of measures. And on the other end, when you talk about antitrust compliance, and I just Googled it before the talk to check, obviously those are mentioned, but the big chunk of the talk or of the documents or the guidelines is always going to be train your people. But this is not enough, and it's not a program in itself. It could be a training program, but a training program is not a compliance program. It's part of an overall compliance program that has to include other measures, other parts, whistleblowing, audits, internal investigations, etc. And in many companies, you're going to have some training sessions. Maybe for newcomers, they're going to enjoy the very lively and enjoyable e-learning session when they arrive at the corporation. They're going to be handed down a code of conduct where the CEO is going to say, cartels are bad, and we don't do that. And that's good. But again, this is good on paper, but it doesn't work in practice. And so it's important when you are advising a client that you do not fall into, I guess, the trap or giving them advice on part of the program without, stressing how important it is for them to put that in perspective with other measures and have a broader approach to, just have you train them, doing a markdown rate, for example, which, it's great, but it has to be complemented with other measures for it to be very efficient. So I think I'm probably, getting out of my time. So I'll just, over just to sum it up. I think what do clients need when it comes to antitrust compliance from their external counsel? And I would say first, it's an excellent understanding of the markets that are, that the client is active on. So of course, first it means homework from the lawyers because competition authorities are good at explaining how market works. So that's really important. But always take the time to talk to the client, talk to business people, understand how it works in practice, who talks to who checks what. This is very, very important. And understanding from this understanding of market going to an understanding of the company's risk. How big is the company on the market? Who has what cap? Who checks? How do the checks and balances work within the organization? Again, talking to the client, talking to business people. This advice has to be easy and simple. You cannot, draft a 60-page memo. It's simple. It should be 2 pages. So this is important, and this is a different mindset I think that you have to adopt. Then, there's again, and I mentioned because I think it's important. Compliance is expensive, so you have to tailor your initiatives to the client's needs and means. Not all clients can afford a mock down rate, but that doesn't mean that is on down rates, for example, in a manner that is more affordable, and that's important as well. And I think, and I hope that was you understood that was my, I guess, the core of what I want to say. I think support in the long run is the most important part. When we talk about compliance, it cannot be just, a memo on, this is how you should do your program, period, and you leave the client with that, because this is just completely inefficient, and it's probably money and time wasted. And I think in terms of your relationship with your client, it won't be good as well. From a commercial perspective, I think we like lawyers that, call back and just ask, how is it going? So, well, yeah, I think I probably exceeded the time. So this is all from me. Thank you for your attention, and I'll leave the floor to you.
Thank you, Quentin. I think it was very, very precious lesson for all of us, for all the external lawyers in this room, let's say. So many thanks. You actually answered my question regarding what do you expect from external lawyers. It was very, very well addressed. But I have another question, because you mentioned that it is important to update all the policies, that it is important to update the system. This is also what DOJ says in its recent guidance for corporate compliance programs. And from your practice, how do you think how often the compliance program should be updated, and how properly prepare for such an amendment or change, because it's not an easy process, I imagine.
Sure. So I think if you are working in a company like Lagardère, for example, which is very active in buying and selling, divesting, investing, going from one market to another, entering and leaving a market, I think this is the first cue that you should update your program. Make sure that any new market is covered, and that if you were allocating resources to a market where basically you don't have much assets left, then you can probably step back. So this is, I guess, the first cue. Then, as regarding, I guess, regular updates, I would say do it in tandem with other updates. For example, here we have every day a risk review by the director of risks, which is, it goes, or it's it covers anything that's legal risk, I guess, but also commercial, etc. This is a good starting point. You talk with this person, and what's new in terms of competition law. Is our risk bigger? Is it the same? I would say it's a good start. And also, I would also I consider that when people join the company, people that have management roles, it's probably a good time just to have a chat with them regarding their understanding of competition law, how they see it, how was it in their former employer, for example. And then doesn't mean that you have to update things, but I think it's a good time to ask yourself the question. And then I guess it also depends on the size of your company. If you're a very big company and you are working in, for example, in the network industry, I would say every year, and it has to be written somewhere in a procedure. If you are working in an industry which is not, in its core doesn't have a very big competition law risk, then it can be more when something happens. As I said, you invest, you divest. So I would say for that, again, there is no one size fits all solution. So again, it depends per area.
Yeah, thank you. But it was very helpful, your answer. So many thanks for that. Thank you for your presentation. So for me, it's just to say that it's probably cliche, but you also said it. It's important for every company to follow all changes in law. And before the new regulation, especially in the field of competition law, enters into force, it's good to verify the compliance program and I think adjust it. And right now I would like to ask Felix, can you please tell us about such an example of new law entering into force?
Yes, I hopefully can. And let me first share my screen with you. So can you see the presentation?
Yes.
Perfect. So let me start. First of all, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues. I'm happy to talk to you in the next 20 minutes on one of the probably most hot topics of these days, of these sunny days, at least in Switzerland. Namely on the relative market power and potential effects on compliance programs. Before we start, let me quickly introduce myself. My name is Felix Schraner. I've started my turn at University of Zurich with Professor Roger Tsai. I think most of you will know him. He's one of the most honored antitrust experts in Switzerland and probably in Europe as well. I've changed then to the administration, to the ZHAW, the State Secretariat for Economic Affairs, where I've been in charge on a national level with the revision of the Cartel Act in Switzerland. That was around 2010-12, something like that. And on an international level with competition aspects in free trade agreements and the cooperation agreement on competition with the EU and so on. Afterwards, I've changed back to Zurich, from Bern back to Zurich to a big four company, KPMG, where I was in charge for competition and data protection. And afterwards, I changed to University of Applied Sciences, where I'm still teaching. And beside that, I'm an antitrust lawyer and commentator in Zurich in antitrust law. That's a bit my background and where I come from. And now let me give you a quick overview on what we are talking about in the next minutes. I would like to lay out first the initial situation a bit with regard to companies, what are the challenges that the companies face, then initial situation with regard to the status of the legislation in the EU and as well as in the member states of the EU, and finally look at the law in Switzerland, law in the books in Switzerland, and the changes in the law in the books on the Para 2 antitrust law. Finally, I would like to look with you together and connect that with the breakout session, the impact on compliance all these legal changes will have. I hope you agree with the proposed agenda, and then I would start if I look at the screen. Everybody seems to be fine with that. Let us go on with that. Initial situation, ladies and gentlemen, when it comes to market dominance and market power. Even if a company is not dominant, the company can have such a strong position on the market that it can cause disruptions in the market. The question then from a legal point of view arises, and as well as from an economical point of view arises, whether such situations are in a way problematic. And the answer is simple in a way, as this situation is then a problem, and insofar as from them, especially small or medium-sized companies, these companies are dependent as suppliers or demanders of a certain type of good or commercial service in such a way that there are no sufficient and reasonable possibilities to switch to other companies. Let me put it like this: if those companies have no choice than to do business with the stronger partner, as there are no sufficient or reasonable alternatives, then we talk about relative market power. Not the classical dominant position, but in a kind of weaker way, relative market power, because there is a dependency. That's a bit the initial situation from a point of view of the companies. Next, let's look a bit closer to the reasons for such dependencies. These reasons may include a specialization of companies and products. Let's take the example of a small biotech company gearing its entire production to the requirements of a large manufacturer. Then there's this so-called dependency. Or the digitization, which is rapidly leading to strong positions, to power positions and pull effects, so that smaller companies are dependent on such companies, such platforms, often platforms in this regard. Third reason may be customer expectations. A good example would like to present to you is the manufacturer of trailer couplings. Take a manufacturer of trailer couplings in Switzerland, who absolutely has to install a certain type of coupling in the trailers because his customers want these couplings. So this manufacturer is dependent on the supply of such couplings, often from abroad. Or then fourth example are the classical lock-in effects. Here, for example, let's take or talk about computer programs that are so expensive that you can no longer switch to a different other provider, and consequently you are locked in, and consequently there is a dependency. So that are the reasons for these dependencies. And now let's have a look at how legislation is tackling this issue, or has been tackling this issue so far. And here first, let's have a look at the EU level. And there we have to differentiate between two situations, and between the agreements and the unilateral conduct. In addition to the European antitrust law, the members, as you know, have their own antitrust law. The EU requirements provide for de facto full harmonization with regard to the treatment of anti-competitive agreements by the national antitrust regimes. So there is a sort of harmonization. In contrast, according to the second sentence of Article 3 of Regulation EC 1/2003, European law only assumes a minimum harmonization with regard to provisions in national antitrust laws concerning unilateral conduct by companies. And they're different situation compared to agreements where there is a de facto full harmonization. And then the regulation EC 1/2003 also explicitly mentions the possibility for member states to introduce provisions in national law to prohibit or punish abuse conduct towards economically, and let's read it aloud, dependent companies. That's the situation on the EU level. And then if we switch down on the level of the member states, here I have brought to you a selection of regulations in member states, because some of the EU members have made use of the possibility of introducing provisions in their national laws to prohibit or penalize abusive practice towards economically dependent companies, and have enacted regulations in this sense. So first of all, to name it is Germany in the GVB, but as well France in the French Code de Commerce, as well as Austria, which knows regulation in this Kartellgesetz, and Italy in its Italian Legge sulla subformitura, which knows respective regulation. So what's the how can you sum it? The concept of this relative market power is part of antitrust laws, and in most of Switzerland's neighboring countries. So it's actually a well-known concept of law, which has been introduced in different member states years ago. That's the situation in EU and its member states. And if we have a look now to Switzerland, on the challenges of the companies that they face producing in Switzerland, the problem is that the challenge is that they compete with companies from abroad when selling their products at home and abroad. And the applicable laws, generally applicable laws, are the WTO rules, free trade agreements I've mentioned before, or the treaties with the EU. In the absence of alternative options, Swiss companies are often forced to pay more for foreign means.
Felix, sorry to interrupt, but you are muted.
Thanks very much. How long have I been muted?
No, just a few seconds.
Okay, thanks very much. Zor. So back tuned. The rationale for the Switzerland surcharge is quite simple. The reason is you're from Switzerland, you have to buy from me in Switzerland with this surcharge. And what is the result? Quite simple as well. This leads to higher production costs in Switzerland. Switzerland becomes or is still a high cost island. And then from a legal perspective, the question arises, how do you tackle that situation? And if you look then into the law, and you see this Article 7, which tackles the dominant abuse of dominant positions. However, this Article 7 in Swiss law is a bit incomplete. There is a gap. And this gap, because relative market power is not tackled in an effective way, because very often, or that's at least the view of the Competition Commission, they're very hesitant to tackle relative market power, and they take the position that there shall be or should be for an intervention shall be a real dominant position. And that's a bit the situation in Switzerland and the background. And then we jump to the second part of my intervention, and I'd like to show you how what the reaction was of the Swiss legislator, because as a result of this, let's call it unfortunate economic situation, a popular initiative was launched in Switzerland, which led the legislator, the parliament, to propose a regulation in this regard, a so-called counter proposal. And the table, the table you can see here shared with you, shows a bit various steps from the start of the initiative to the proposal, the revision of Swiss law with regard to relative market power, which is expected to enter into force on January 1st, 2022. And this revision tackles relative market power, and is in a way was inspired, let's put it like this, was inspired by the German regulation in the GWB. And how does this new article as new regulation read? I've brought it to you here. You can see it in para 4. There was an addendum which reads, an undertaking shall be deemed to have relative market power if other undertakings are dependent on it for the supply of or demand for a good or service in such a way that there are no sufficient and reasonable possibilities of switching to other undertakings. That is one part. With regard to the position or the dependency. And then in Article 7, which must be read together with Article 4, we have defined the unlawful conduct by a dominant and relatively powerful company. And The provision reads like dominant undertakings and undertakings with relative market power shall behave unlawfully if by abusing their position in the market they hinder or other undertakings in entering into or exercising competition or disadvantage the market opponent. And then the behavior is detailed much more in a way that such conduct shall include, but shall not be limited to, the restriction of the ability of demanders to purchase goods or services offered in Switzerland abroad at the market prices, ladies and gentlemen, and customary terms and conditions prevailing there. So mostly broad. That are the two new provisions that will be introduced in Switzerland or been enacted in per 1st January 2022. What are the situations? I have here brought to you a short illustrative graphic. The situation is first from a distribution point of view, a relative powerful provider provides its goods to a dependent demander. That's one situation. And the other situation, situation two, is the purchasing situation where the provider is dependent and relative market power is with the demander. These are the two situations. And what is then the aim of the new regulation? The aim of the new regulation is what's the goal? What was the expectation of the initiative committee? There's a close-up target and a long-term goal. The close-up target is to give companies that still produce in Switzerland the opportunity to avoid these Switzerland Swiss surcharges, and by that improve their competitiveness vis-a-vis competitors from abroad to establish here the so-called level playing field. That's the close-up target, and there's a long-term expectations or goals. If many companies take advantage of these opportunities, the prices for many means of productions should fall to around the euro level in Switzerland, and then that will improve the competitiveness of Switzerland, of the companies producing in Switzerland. Then second question here: which cases are in the foreground? And I think that's interesting from a compliance point of view and perspective. The cases that are probably in the foreground are two. So the so-called company-related dependence on production resources, and due to decision by the company, So let's take here an example. Let's take the example of the Grand Hotel Bad Ragaz in Switzerland, which has decided, a decision by the company, and decided to replace its dishes.
Felix, sorry, but you are muted again.
Thanks again.
Just a few seconds.
That's a mysterium. I haven't touched anything. Don't know what's going on here. Thanks. Thanks for that. So one example is the Grand Hotel Bad Ragaz, for example, in Switzerland, which has decided to replace its dishes and may now, based on this new provision, buy its dishes to the same conditions and to the based on the same terms in Europe, in a member state, the European Union. Or take the examples of a software update of all kinds, takes SAP which you can now buy based on these provisions. The other case which is in the foreground are is the company related dependency on production resources due to customer demand. Here we have the example of the coupling that I've presented to you before, or take the Coca-Cola examples at the retailer in the catering business, or take the Nivea hand cream, which as a retailer you must have in your stocks, which you consider as a must-in-stock product, and so you can buy then these products now abroad. And these are the two goals of this new regulation, which takes us to part 3 of my presentation, namely what is basically what is the impact on compliance. And I've put here on the slide a couple of questions which I consider to be relevant for the discussion as well afterwards. Relevant for compliance officers, relevant for managers, and question that should be raised from an economical point of view, but also from a legal point of view. And a good starting point, and that's the first question, is always to look a bit around, to check the impact that relative market power has in the neighboring countries, has in Germany, what is the impact in France, in Austria, in Italy, and so on, and to deviate from that learnings to the home market. Then the more specific question is, and that's second, what are the specific effects of relative market power on dependent companies based in Switzerland or based abroad, and companies with market power that's based in Switzerland or abroad. Third is what measures are to be taken by the companies and the compliance officers in view of the entry into force of the new provision in Switzerland. And there you can consider the economical points, the legal aspects, and of course the processes and procedures that you must establish in compliance. So that's a bit the short tour d'horizon about the situations from a legal perspective, from the perspective of the companies, then the new developments on a legislatory level in Switzerland, and third, the compliance impact that we will have to discuss afterwards. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Felix. It was also very, very interesting, especially that it looks like this new regulation is kind of trend worldwide, as you mentioned. As we are running out of time, I will only ask you a short question regarding this new trend and this new regulation. Do you think, like in your opinion, do you think that compliance officer, due to this new regulations worldwide, will be one's obligatory position in every company?
I don't know whether that helps, but I think compliance becomes more and more important in the companies, and the role of a lead compliance officers becomes more and more important, which acts on an adequate level. And I think to see these legislative changes, legal changes in the law, and so on, must raise the awareness of a compliance officer, and he should give a signal to his management if he becomes aware of such developments.
Yeah, okay, perfectly understood. Thank you for that. So as we already said, not only changes in law might trigger the necessity to update the compliance program, but also identified within the company infringements. And it looks like the best tool for identifying and understanding the origin of the infringement is an internal investigation. When it's well conducted, it can be a great lesson for all the organization. And Fabio, can you give us some hints how to smoothly go through this internal investigation?
Yes, Alexandra, thank you very much. And welcome also to everybody joining this session. I will talk about the compliance investigation, and this will be a more broader session, as I think the compliance investigation, if we talk about antitrust or corruption or other legal aspect, there are more or less always the same questions arising. So I will just briefly make a little basic presentation on compliance investigations, as I'm not sure if or how many of you already made such investigations from start to the end. And therefore, I will just briefly make a few points talking about challenges of an internal investigation, how an internal investigations can start, what the procedure looks like, at least in my eyes, the basic procedure, and at least some legal issues when it comes to an internal investigation. First part, and I guess Quentin mentioned that as well, internal investigations are a must part of each compliance management system. If you have a compliance management system and you don't have the ability to make investigations, that's like a police is not able to make controls. So you need that, otherwise the compliance management system is a nice document, but nobody cares. If you talk, or if you're ever part of a compliance investigation, keep in mind, first of all, these kind of things have a social impact, psychological impact on people. And nobody likes it when you're controlled, when your emails are searched, when you're in the focus. You know that when you have ever been into a police control, that's not the situation, the situations that you like. And this puts pressure on, I would say, on each person, on the team, on the culture. So you have always a very strong social impact when you are in part of an internal investigation, when you're focused people on the investigation. So don't underestimate the social impact. And number two, it's, and I think Quentin mentioned that, it binds economic resources. You need people, you need money. It creates sanctions, maybe financially. So you have a strong economic impact whenever it comes to internal investigations. During the investigation, after the investigation, sometimes you use external lawyers, external specialists that cost you money. So you have a strong economic impact, and certainly you have to, that's the last point, you have to really watch the legal parameters. There are a lot of things that can go wrong on the legal side, and if you make mistakes in the internal investigation, it makes it harder for you afterwards. When you have, for example, legal procedures and you made mistakes during the investigations, you, for example, cannot use the evidence and so on. So be careful that your investigation stays in line with all the legal aspects. We're talking about labor law, criminal law, data protection, and so on and so on. That's the first part. So keep in mind, internal investigations have an impact on various issues. Starting point usually can be clients, it can be authorities, it can be whistleblowing hotlines, it can be an internal revision that pops up with some information about a potential cartel, it can be a journalist asking you for information about a meeting. So the trigger for putting an internal investigation on scene can vary a lot. The execution then usually ends up with a compliance officer who is in charge. He usually uses other resources, HR, IT, or external lawyers, depending on the issue. You can easily imagine when you need to check emails of an employee, you need the IT guy pulling these emails out. When you have interviews with people, you need the HR guys maybe in charge. You have maybe also external lawyers when it comes to legal privilege. So you have plenty of people involved. Mostly the compliance officer is the man or the woman in charge. The impact, last but not least, yes, you have impact on the company, the shareholders when it comes to sanctions, about impacts on the employees when they got fired, or you have sanctions on the employees, or in antitrust issues, certainly on business partners, or when you're not working with certain business partners because you fear cartels and so on. So you have impacts on various stakeholders. And this shows you, I guess, how many stakeholders you have to consider when you are conducting or executing a compliance investigation. It's not something just inside a company, it has effects outside the company, and it has lots of effects inside the company because lots of different departments are affected. Yeah, the third part of my short presentation, the typical procedure of an internal investigation. Usually, the investigation starts with the before mentioned trigger, a message, or somehow something that makes you, as a compliance officer, pushes you to do something. If you do nothing, maybe this can be seen as not fulfilling your duties. So you have to be active. You have to do something. You're a compliance officer. You're in a special position. You're the watchdog of the company. If you stand still and you do nothing at all, this might be seen as a violation of your contract with the company, your labor contract. So you have this trigger first, and this makes you move. So the second step usually is that you have a very short summary examination. Is this a case which affects really compliance, or is it maybe something that has nothing to do with compliance at all? Maybe it's a pure HR issue. Is it an issue where we have deadlines to consider? Is it an issue that causes really maybe media attention or serious legal issues? So just a first summary, how big, in a quantity and in quality, talking how serious is the case. This is the second step once you receive the message due to a whistleblowing hotline, a client, or whatever. And after you made this summary, in most companies, the third step is that you go to the boss, to the compliance head, to the CEO, and you inform him and you make recommendation. So you tell him, look, we have this case. I looked at it. It seems serious. We have deadlines. We have to take action, and I recommend this or that. In most companies, that's the situation. In most companies, it's not the compliance officer himself who decides whether you do an internal investigation or not. This decision has to be taken by the senior management, by the CEO, maybe by the head of compliance, but it's not a decision that the compliance officer can take himself. So the third step is information and recommendation. You go to the boss, you tell him what happened, you tell him your recommendation, and the recommendation will be an internal investigation. Well, fourth step then is planning and execution of the internal investigation. Planning means that you have a timeline, you have a project plan, a project management. An internal investigation is nothing else than project management. So you have to plan that project. What are the milestones? Who is involved? Who is the aim? How long will it take? How many resources do I have? It's planning and it's implementation. And you have to do that in advance, otherwise you end up in chaos. Fifth step, when all is done, is reporting and measures. This means that each investigation ends with a report to the management, maybe to the board, and with measures. What are you suggesting? Compliance measures, sanctions, and so on. This is the end of the internal investigation. And I put that as a sixth point. Keep in mind, whenever we're talking about compliance, in investigations and sanctions are always a very delicate subject. Sanctions have a very strong impact on the culture of the company. Are you firing people? Are you treating everybody the same way? Do you make differences between C-level and other people when it comes to infringements? How hard, how soft are the sanctions? This is not that easy as it seems. And I always recommend keep in mind that with sanctions, the signal is always very strong to the employees. The signal is also strong for the media, for the stakeholders, for the shareholders. Keep in mind that with sanctions, you can do a lot of good, but you can also destroy a lot. You can create a panic culture in the company when you're too hard. But when you're too soft, otherwise you kill the compliance management system. There was always a hard balance to find between being too hard or being too soft. Last point, just to put out some of the legal issues when it comes to internal investigations. And these are for me the evergreens when it comes to internal investigations. Be pretty much safe in labor law. That's my first recommendation, because you're touching a lot of labor law issues. When it comes to the duties of the company for the employees, when it comes to the duties of the employee for the company, providing information, granting access to information, when it comes to interviews, when you're talking with the employees, when you're controlling them, when you're monitoring them, either emails, either internet, either your camera. So you have in labor law a lot of touching points when it comes to internal investigations, because you have to take care of your employees otherwise. And on the other hand, the employee has also certain rights, and you have to be pretty safe on how far can you go, how much pressure can you put on the employee, and where do you go too far, and maybe you give the employee instruments to go against the company when it comes to a legal procedure. So labor law, always a very, very, very carefully treated legal part when it comes to internal investigation. Second part, criminal law. These are the issues talking about the private sphere and the monitoring of emails, the monitoring of internet tracking, and so on. Also here, I recommend to at least have a look at the legal framework of the respecting country when you want to check emails of an employee and the internet, so on. How far can you go? What is allowed? What is not allowed? Do you have to inform the employee in advance or not? When you're as a company infringing criminal law during an internal investigation, and it's not fun, because the employee then takes a lawyer and he goes against the company. You can kill all the evidence and you stand there. Maybe you know the employee did something wrong. Maybe you have the evidence, but you cannot use it. And instead you have a criminal case against the company because you were not allowed to do stuff that you did during the internal investigation. And last part, you all know with data protection, when it comes to internal investigation, often but you're searching documents, emails, and stuff of the employees. So you're watching also into personal data. Be careful. There are lots of principles in data protection you have to consider. The basic message is here: inform your employees before you collect data. Tell them or write it into the employment contracts. Nowadays, with data protection, it's a mining field. when you go into an internal investigation and you're just collecting everything, you use it, and suddenly you collected very personal data your employee had on an email server and marked as private, and you're using that information. Also there, the sanctions are not funny, and you don't want to have a legal case against your employee when he comes with a data protection infringement. So this in very short, dear colleagues, very briefly, some aspects, what to consider in an internal investigation, how a procedure could look like, and what really basic legal issues you have to consider. Thank you very much for the attention. I give back to you, dear Alexandra.
Thank you, Fabio. It was extremely interesting. I have two questions. I will ask them just in a minute. First, I will tell you that because we are a small group, so we decided internally that we probably will not do breakout rooms, but we'll have a common discussion here all together in a plenary room, let's say. So you can already think about the questions you would like to ask to all the panelists. So I will start with these questions I owe you, Fabio. So I would like to ask you, because you are you have great experience in conducting internal investigations. So at the end of the day, this internal investigation is human-to-human experience, and from my experience, it might be stressful for the interviewed custodian, but also for the lawyer. And I would like to take the chance that I have you here. I would like to ask you, what was the most stressful situation during the internal investigation for you?
Thank you for the question, Alexandra. Well, I will never forget one situation, but it was not during the investigation. It popped up afterwards, but it started during the investigation, and maybe it's a nice learning for everybody. We made this internal investigation in a small company, and we needed the emails, and it was in the banking industry. We needed some Reuters and Bloomberg chats. So. We had to do with the IT guy, and this IT guy of the company was very older, like 55 years old, very friendly, very nice guy. And we as external lawyers, we asked him to provide us with the emails, the chats of certain employees. So he did that. He provided us with the material. And during the internal investigation, we searched that, we found some stuff and so on. Internal investigation was finished, and half a year later, this IT guy got fired by the company. So guess what happened? The guy ended up talking to the CEO of the company, and he said, well, listen, you remember half a year ago, there was this internal investigation, and I pulled out emails of the employees, and I made a copy for myself, and I have that copy at home. And I just don't know what to do with that. I mean, maybe it's important. I don't know what to do with it. And I thought I can easily destroy it. And I have 6 months paid now. Maybe 6 months paid would be also a nice option. Maybe we find a solution. And well, I ended up talking with this guy again, 6 months before, friendly guy, very nice. And 6 months later, it was just about money. So for me, from a human part, yeah, strange somehow. We found a solution. He got 6 months paid, and he handed us over the copies. I don't know if he had other copies at home, but it is now 5 years away, so nothing happened. But from a human point of view, is like on one side, your friend and all's good, and 6 months later, it's just about business. This was my experience. Certainly, learning, we did not thought about the IT guy at that moment. We should have had him better controlled and so on. We did not think about it. This could happen, and yeah, That's how made it more expensive for the company at the end.
So that confirms that there is a lot of challenges when it comes to compliance and also maybe especially internal investigation. So maybe the last question for you is, I would like to ask you to give us some practical tips how to examine, or maybe a better word is to talk with the people during the internal investigations, like golden rules.
Well, golden rule in these strange times, try, even though it's maybe due to the coronavirus difficult, but always try to make it live, face to face. You have to find out if somebody lies to you or if he says the truth, and online that's way more difficult than if you have the people in front of you, if you can look at him, how is he nervous, what he's doing with his hands, what he's doing with his eyes, where is he looking when you ask him something, and so on. So make it whenever possible live, so that you see the person and not just see it here online, that you have it in front of you and you see, is he sweating, is he getting hot. This is the second point. I mean, a little bit of, I would say, hobby psychology helps. How do you see when somebody's lying? Is he looking, when you're looking right up, but every answer means left side up is lying, right side is truth. Sweating, hands. Here, man, is it getting wet or not? Simple stuff like this, but it keeps you, this hobby psychology helps you to find out if somebody is lying straight to your face or if he's not. You will never be 100% sure, but at least some hobby psychology helps. And the third golden rule, never trust anybody.
Like from Dr. House.
I don't know, Quentin, if you have remarks on that, but I guess it's hard to say, but I guess you agree to a certain point.
I would have a question for Quentin, if that is fine, Alexandra, or do you have another question?
I have a question from Karen.
Sorry, Karen, go ahead, sorry.
Maybe Karen, you would like to ask the question yourself, just to have the discussion. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. I had sent it through the chat. The point, Quentin, is you mentioned about the, of course, importance of knowing about the company when you are designing a compliance program for the company. But you also mentioned the difficulty sometimes that we have with budget, because sometimes they do compliance programs and trainings because, well, this is necessary, they have their office, etc. So I don't know if you would have some tips for us to how we could learn a bit more about the company if we have a more strict budget and we cannot, for instance, interview employees. I don't know how to get this information from the company, so to do a more tailored compliance program.
Right?
Yeah.
No, thank you. Thank you for your question. So I think interviews could be done in many ways. And for example, you could pass along a questionnaire, just like top 10 questions to that would be provided to the lawyers with whom you interact, for them to then spread them around and get information from business people based on questions that you consider relevant. And then, you don't bill the time that you spend doing the interviews. So, I mean, it's not as good as obviously having an interaction, but it's could be good enough. Also, identifying the people that you want to talk to. And those people are not necessarily the top management or the people that you usually will talk to. So I think this is also something that you have to plan with the lawyers you're interacting with. Who is the relevant person on this specific market, and who will provide you genuine information. And usually, for example, if you would ask me, I would tell you, talk to her, don't talk to him. He might be the boss, or she might be the boss, she might know more, but I know that, she, for example, she's very trained in computational, so she's not going give you genuine answers. Again, teaching employees how to cheat. I'll come back to that. So I think, it's about identifying the relevant people. You could do sort of a mixture of both questionnaires or written exchanges with some, and then based on those questionnaires, you then conduct 1 or 2 interviews that are relevant. And I think also you can also sort of divide and conquer. Some of the work can be done by the lawyers if you trust them, in-house lawyers if you trust them. Some of the work can be done with the external counsel. And I think, all those sort of different methods can be combined to make sure that in the end, on the specific market where there is possible dominance or a lot of information exchange, or I don't know, tenders, then you meet the people and you talk to them. On the other markets, basically you have a risk-based approach where when there are less risks, you spend less time, you bill less time, and the client is happy. And it's very, I think it's very understandable for a client to say, okay, here we need to spend a little more because there's a risk. And then you as a lawyer can say, well, you have a risk. A risk in competition law means fines, it means money, it means lost opportunities. So let's spend a little more here, time and money, and where we have less risk, then you can do something different. I think it could be a way, I guess. That would convince me at least.
Shall I ask my question directly, Alexandra? Quentin, it's again a question for you. I was wondering how you've been coping with the fact that during the Corona pandemic, we were not really able to do live trainings, which was quite a challenge for all our clients. And for some of them, we haven't now organized live trainings for 1.5 years. And I think we all agree that it's quite an important part of any compliance system. So what did you do? Did you organize virtual training sessions? What do you think about e-learnings in general? Because now we get many requests from clients to offer e-learnings. And I still personally believe that an e-learning is fine, but it can never substitute a live training session. So I would appreciate your view on this.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Fully agree with you. So I don't have, unfortunately, a very satisfying answer. My experience was we trained less people. I'm pretty sure some of the trainings were less efficient because through the screen, it's, you have less interactions. And I think a good indicator that didn't work as well is that usually after a training, you have someone who say, okay, I just understand, and I now understand that there's an issue and I want to talk to you about this issue. And I experienced less of that. So, it's not easy. But what I can tell is you can probably do different forms of trainings. So training could be a session where you have, 10 people, 50 people, and you make a 1-hour presentation. And this obviously doesn't work during a pandemic at all for so many reasons. But I think, and what I try to do is having interactions with smaller groups, maybe based on documents or a specific issue. So those are not trainings per se, but you raise awareness on a specific issue during, for example, if you are asked about, let's say I was asked about vertical price fixing. I was asked about a case where vertical price fixing could have happened. And what I did is, instead of just, answering, basically responding to the assignment, I try to implement some compliance in that. So having a discussion which starts by what are the rules with the relevant people here, and then say, okay, let me follow up with advice on how to handle the matter, but also a quick 2-pager on what is vertical price fixing and how to tackle it. And I think it's another form of training. Obviously, it requires some more work because you're training 2, 3, 5 people. But you know that those people, it's sort of in situ training. They're being trained with an example that is very relevant because it's basically their issue of the day. So I think it's something to keep in mind when you are interacting with the client or as an in-house lawyer with your counterparts, trying to train them along the way. What's the issue? What's the matter? But how do you, okay, we learned something from that matter and how are we going to tackle further matters that resemble them, and drawing the lines that I was talking about earlier. So yeah, but again, I don't have a super easy and convincing answer on that. I think pandemic is hard on that front too.
Thank you for the answer. Are there any other questions?
I have maybe just one other question, if we still have time. Do we still have time, Alexandra?
Yeah, I think we still have
just
5 minutes or 2.
Do you see, that's a question for all of you, do you see that clients, due to the compliance defense, are now even more interested in compliance systems, and do they take into account how to structure and organize the compliance system in order to comply with those guidelines? I don't know who wants to answer.
Maybe I could go ahead because it's going to be very quick. In France, we don't have a compliance defense. And there used to be a situation where should you settle a case with the French competition authority and commit to implement a program or to enhance the current measures that would be implemented already in within your company, you would get a lesser fine. That doesn't exist, that no longer exists. So today, the issue is the authority considers that everyone should have a compliance program, and that if you don't, it's sort of could be used against you, sort of within when considering what's the appropriate fine amount. And if you have one but it failed, they could say, well, you knew it was bad and you act upon it anyway. So it's quite hard, and you're kind of between the, I don't know what's the expression in English, but you know, le marteau et l'enclume, we say in French. Yeah, so compliance defense just doesn't work here, and so in a way you're really doing compliance for the purest reason, which is trying not to infringe competition law, but it won't be any helpful down the line.
Yeah, maybe a small input also from my side. I think when you have companies who are in a antitrust investigation, then it works quite well, because you can tell them, look, it has an effect on the sanction. Maybe it has an effect on the sanction, so you can at least try. This works. For companies that have no issues at all with antitrust, and you try them to sell antitrust compliance, maybe with a future, that's like selling insurance. At least most companies that I know say, no, we save the money because we talk about it when it's relevant, but now, sorry, not relevant, and you cannot give us a guarantee that it helps us. So as Quentin said, we don't have that in Switzerland, typically, the compliance defense. So there it doesn't work. It works with companies that are already in an investigation.
Okay, thank you. I think we are running out of time, so I will just kill the discussion right now. Sorry for that. Just to sum up, I would like to thank all the panelists. It was extremely interesting. It was a pleasure to have you with us this afternoon. I'm pretty sure we've learned our lesson from your presentations, and we'll try to implement your suggestions, especially yours, Quentin, into our daily practice. Well, to get ready for the challenge, I think we as the external lawyers, we have to have this deep understanding of our clients' needs and expectations. And I hope we all have this ability to go deep into the business to give our client the best remedy and solution. So thank you all, and I will give the floor to Isabel, who would like to say something at the very end of this session.
Alexandra, I think it's fine. You've already said everything. You've wrapped it up nicely. So I just wanted to thank all of you, the 4 of you, in the name of the Antitrust Commission as well. We look forward. It was a great session, very inspiring, very interesting. And we look forward to seeing you all hopefully in Zurich for IJUST Annual Congress. We will have a Antitrust Commission meeting within the next weeks to discuss further events and networking opportunities. So let's stay in touch. And I hope you all have a lovely week and enjoy the sunny summer.
Thank you.